sit down at your desk to write a brand new story. You have an idea for a character, but their world doesn't exist yet. Don't worry, I'm here to help you. I'm Erin A, and here is my Worldbuilding 101. The techniques of worldbuilding aren't new, but the concept is. In school, we teach setting, the idea of a place and a time. But in reality, world building is so much more than that. Merriam-Webster defines world building as the art of creating a new fictional world, but goes on to explain that that's kind of a subpar summary of the idea. The word was originally used to describe the realm of artists and poets, but now, as an idea, it means so much more. Back in the early 19th century, world building was a scientific idea explaining geography in stories. Oh, how far we've come. So here is my definition of world building, or maybe my goal of world building, which is every element needed in order to construct a three-dimensional fictional world. Okay, so that seems like a lot. So how do I start world building? If you look at the massive worlds like Harry Potter or Star Wars, they took years and years of development and lots of talent, and I'm just starting out. How am I supposed to figure this out? Well, there's a few things that you want to keep in mind. 1, keep it simple. That sounds ironic right now, but every single world you've ever read starts small. You can grow it to any size, but you want it to start small. 2, keep track of all of the ideas relating to your world. Emily Rodda, creator of the Del Toro Quest series, has a simple and really useful tool for keeping ideas together. Shoeboxes. She keeps all scraps of paper relating to a single idea in a shoebox. When the shoebox is full, the story is ready to work on. This is something completely related to world building. If you're worried about not having enough material, you can wait until you do. But the trick with making this work is writing down every idea that you have. Personally, I use a notebook where I keep all of my decisions about a world in one place. 3, know your genre. Everything we currently regard as world building came from the creation of science fiction and fantasy genres. Even if your building is set in a historical period or you're writing a romance novel, all of the world building techniques that we currently regard as world building come from speculative genres. Each genre will have its own world tropes that you can learn from, so research is the key. Often science fiction stories will be centered around a key scientific idea or a theory. Be aware that sci-fi is a big umbrella that covers a lot of ground. Underneath it is the world of punk lit, or punk literature. Each of these smaller genres have their own rules or ideas that you might want to draw from. Genre is a great framework, but the trick is learning the rules before you subvert them. When world building, use all the tricks and tips that you can. I'm going to go over a few of my favorites because these are genres that I like to work in. Come with me down the rabbit hole that is punk lit. Cyberpunk. Cyberpunk has become a really common genre unto itself. It's a radical type of science fiction that focuses on AI, cybernetics, really high technology, but often with a degree of social breakdown or radical world change. But it was officially called cyberpunk in 1984 when William Gibson released Neuromancer. Really good book, completely recommend that you read it. Other proponents during the 80s of cyberpunk included Katsuhiro Otomo's manga series and subsequent film Akira, and Ridley Scott's Blade Runner. Essentially, cyberpunk exists when you abandon the utopian vision for the future. Steampunk. The simplest way to explain steampunk is if people from the Victorian period were writing their own science fiction. It's a futuristic version of their own level of technology and their own society. Steampunk draws from late 19th century industrial steam-powered machinery. Again, steampunk as a genre was created in the 1980s, also by William Gibson when he wrote The Difference Engine with Bruce Sterling. I love steampunk as a genre because of its level of tactility. So, how do I start? Let's look at the idea of rules. Now, that doesn't mean the rules of world building. It means your world's rules. When you work with science fiction and fantasy, a lot of the decisions you make will come down to a rule-based system. One of the easiest ways to think about this is in regards to some form of magic. Say I have the power to create life. What are the limits of that power? Do I have exceptions? Can I bring anything back to life? Is it only animals? Is there a period of time where that life could exist for? These are all things that you're going to want to take into account, and sometimes your rules will change. I can guarantee you that your rules will change as you work on your story and as you build your world. Don't worry about that. The goal is to write it down as you go. From my personal experience, I know that I've worked on a project for a while, gone away, come back, and I can't remember how my world's supposed to be. I don't remember what my magic system was. I don't remember how my technology works. So a lot of the time, writing down these ideas as rules will save you in the long run. Consistency. Now, this is something that you're going to need as a writer, but also something that you're going to need just for world building. Your world needs to be consistent. This is kind of where rules start to come in. Rules help you maintain consistency. Say you decide at the beginning of your book that an alien species can defy gravity. Well, does that work on every planet? Does it work out in space? Does it work if you bred that alien species with your own? A lot of this might sound really far-fetched, but sometimes you really don't know where your story is going to go when you start world building right at the beginning. So remember, if you decide something right at the beginning and you wrote it down, you have to remain consistent. However, keep this in mind. Evolution. I wrote my rules, I've been consistent, but I get to a point in my story where I break a rule and I don't have a choice. For the story to keep going forward, that rule has to be broken. And if I break it, I won't be consistent. This is absolutely fine. Do not fear rewriting and the evolution of your world. If something changes, you can go back and change it, but you just have to make sure that it doesn't violate any of the other rules that you've set down. World building is a very circular process. Remember, you're going to do everything more than once. It's going to take much more time than you think. But at the end, if you keep to your rules and your consistency, and you remember that evolution and rewriting is perfectly natural, what you will wind up with is a world that functions. Look to other writers. Somebody has done what you're trying to do before. Learn from their mistakes, break down their work, even borrow certain ideas. Whenever you dig down into this, remember, world building is meant to be fun. When you find your own flow, try everything and then edit. My final take is something that I think about when I think about the worlds that I create, which is the goal of any world builder is to create an engine that could run without them. A really interesting example of this is the DUNE series by Frank Herbert. Frank Herbert only wrote a certain amount of books before he died, but the world that he created was so three-dimensional and deep that his son and another writer continued the DUNE legacy, wrote prequels and sequels, and continued to build the world that Herbert had created. There's a really simple technique that you can do that I personally use all the time. Sit down with somebody who doesn't know your world at all and talk to them like you've already read what you're writing. You know your world completely, you understand the characters, you understand the rules, you understand your consistency, and try and argue that your world is real. Have that person interrupt you, have them ask questions. You'll start to know that your world is beginning to function when you actually have answers to those questions. And remember, questions shouldn't be scary. If somebody asks you a question that you don't have an answer to, make a note of it and try and figure out what the answer should be. Personally, as a writer, world building is something that I genuinely look forward to. I love starting new projects, not necessarily because I get to write a new story, but often because I get to build a new world. I learn from my old mistakes, I get to try new rules, new scope, new vision, and for me, that's really exciting. I hope that some of the stuff I've talked about today you will find useful in your own creative practice. WestWords is a non-profit organisation working with and for writers coming out of Western Sydney. This video was made in collaboration with their Emerging Writers Fellowship, which I was very lucky to be one of the recipients of.